Reviewing our minutes. If there's any questions or. No questions, I'd ask for a motion to approve. Thank you, Commissioner Brox, and a second by Commissioner Vaughn. And all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. That motion carries. And then next on the agenda is our bills. So John, did you want to say anything, or Eric, about the bills?
Sure. A couple of bills that we had on from last month, and I'm going to pull the page up. We had some legal costs, generally, riverfront title commitment for our Alta and title commitment for Block 1, and then our energy bill for the 410, 412. I will note that the energy bill that we do have for the existing properties we acquired on Vermilion Street, this should be about it. So the energy has been turned off, and I think these are just catching up from when it was open.
Okay. Any questions for John? If not, I'd ask for a motion to approve the bills. So Commissioner Sinclair and Commissioner Johnson second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed, that carries. And now we go to new business, and we have Resolution 2022-12 approving a contract for private development and providing the form, terms, and covenants and directions for issuance of the tax increment revenue note for NJS Development, LLC. Eric, are you?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'll give a brief overview and then turn it over to our financial consultant, Tammy Amdahl with Northland Securities. I also note that the developer, Nate Stencil, is in the audience this evening as well. Before you is the resolution, as was mentioned by the HEDRA president. General overview is the TIF note would be for just over $1.9 million. It would be a pay-as-you-go TIF note, essentially as future tax revenue was paid by the developer based on the new valuation of the project. That money would be repaid back to the developer in the form of a rebate up until that TIF note, that $1.9 million was repaid, including interest. We do have a minimum assessment agreement for the project proposed at $17.8 million. We're projecting that the TIF note would be repaid approximately in 14 years based on staff's best judgment of estimated assessment for the project, again, once completed. So with that, I'll turn it to Tammy, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Tammy Amdahl with Northland Securities. Mr. Chair, members of HEDRA, I am going to touch on a few high points. Eric did a nice job summarizing the key points. So tonight, the resolution relates solely to the contract entering into the terms for the assistance. I would note that HEDRA and the City Council in February actually took action, held the public hearing to establish the TIF district. So that work was already done, and tonight it's really looking at the contract in terms for assistance. The $1.9 million, I will emphasize, as Eric noted, while it is the issuance of a revenue note by HEDRA to the developer, it is pay-go. It is solely payable from the extent that tax increment is sufficient to make payment, and the payments will be based upon 90% of the tax increment that HEDRA collects would be payable with interest at 4%, I believe, on the note. The term is up to 20 years, and the district was established for 26 years. But based upon our analysis and in conversation with the developer, we actually believe that that revenue note, given if current assumptions hold, will be paid off in less than 15 years. Given the uncertainty in today's market, costs, other things, we felt it was reasonable to give that opportunity should assumptions turn out to be different, that it could go out the 20 years. But I want to note that to HEDRA that we really think that it's more likely that it will be paid off sooner. And at that time, HEDRA, because this is a redevelopment district, you'll have some opportunities to determine, given the facts that are happening at that time in the larger district, which includes more than the developer's parcel, whether you would continue to keep the district open at that time or decertify. Those are facts that we don't know today, but I would just note that. You had the memo from myself and my colleague Jessica Green in your packet. That went into more detail. I won't touch on all those points, but I will close my comments and would be happy to address any other items that were included in that memo or other questions you may have for me.
Any questions for Tammy? Commissioner Sinclair?
Can I ask a math question around TIF in general. So is there generally a compelling reason for a developer to accelerate, or is there a scenario where it makes sense to pay it off sooner than the conservative estimate? Or is it generally in the best interest of cash flow and overall, I guess, long-term cost to just take whatever amount of time is allotted?
I can speak to that and maybe a little bit background on TIF revenue notes, because this can be confusing. So the HEDRA is issuing the note to the developer and a promise to pay. So it's actually the opposite. So the developer isn't paying it back. HEDRA is issuing a note, and the principal amount of that note, 1.9 million, will reimburse eligible TIF costs. It is not a full faith and credit obligation of HEDRA, the city of Hastings. It is payable solely from tax increment. So the developer pays real estate taxes on time in full, which generates a portion of that is tax increment, and it is that tax increment that HEDRA will use to repay that note. So the developer actually doesn't get to make a determination to pay it off sooner or later. It will simply be how much actual increment is generated to allow for you to make those payments. And my comment on we believe that it will be a shorter term is based upon current tax law, current tax rates. There is a minimum assessment agreement, as Eric mentioned, as part of this, so we know there's a minimum valuation. If that value, it won't be less than that, but if it turns out to be higher, that would be an example that note would get amortized even faster than what we're presently estimating. But 20 years, 15 years is a long time. Tax rates could change, state tax law could change during that time, so we don't know exactly when that will be repaid. We do know that it will not exceed 20 years. You will not pay more than 1.9 million in principal, and you will not pay more than 90% of the actual tax increment that is generated from the district. Does that help? It's confusing that it's a note, but it's actually HEDRA is promising to pay the developer.
Understood. I'm slightly less confused now.
Absolutely.
I think a good example, I wish taxes would go down over that period of time, but history tells me it probably won't. I think a good example, like we've had a TIF note in the city of Rochester where the taxable value far exceeded the projections. And what they chose to do is just allocate, pretty much as they could. So it was a note that could have stretched on for, up to 20 years, and they ended up amming it out over basically 8 years. So they really, basically took, all of our tax revenue, and they're paying it as quick as they can. This, of course, is a bigger amount. That was a smaller TIF, and it allowed them really. The property generated, say, $400,000 of property tax a year, and the TIF note was like $1.5 million. So they just chose to do it quicker. I don't know if that's what they're doing, I guess. And I think that's kind of based on your question. And what Tammy's saying is if it does, if taxes are a lot higher, that could be paid off much quicker, which in turn would save interest to the city or HEDRA, right? Why am I taking over for you? No. What was I doing?
No worries. Mr. Chair.
Okay, any other questions? I just had one question as far as the dollar amounts. When you have the 17.8 and this TIF principal amount is about 10.75% of the project, is there a maximum that you can go with these, or how much can we do?
There is not a maximum amount. That is a local decision for HEDRA to make. The developer had requested, I think it was around $4 million in their application to HEDRA. After reviewing the pro forma changes that occur between application and when we do our work, the final agreement that was reached was the 1.9 million. And again, over that 20 years, but given the math, we expect that to be paid back sooner.
Yeah, so it's a negotiated amount, but it is specific for certain parts of the project, for the redevelopment and
That is correct. So the 1.9 million, before HEDRA will actually issue that note, you're not issuing the note tonight. You are approving the contract with terms, and in that contract is an agreement to issue the note. After the developer proves up those costs of the 1.9 million, and the agreement specifies what's eligible to be reimbursed. And that is invoices. After that is proved up, then HEDRA, at that time, at a future date to be determined, would actually issue the note.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Tammy.
You're welcome.
So what do we need to do now?
Or actually, it's the actually approved resolution, right?
So-
Mr.
yeah.
Chair, if there are no,
Okay,
No,
if there are no further comments or questions from the HEDRA board, we would look for a motion on the resolution.
yeah, so with that, I'd look for a motion to approve. Okay, we have a second. Second from Commissioner Vaughn. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, and opposed, and that motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
You too. And next on the agenda is the Resolution 2022-09, approving of facade improvements for a grant for 311 2nd Street East. Eric?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Yes, the Hastings Family Service has submitted an application for a facade improvement grant to support their build-out of a recent acquisition that they made at 311 2nd Street East. That'll help, really, they needed the space to support the various activities and services that they provide to the community. The proposed project specifically that was applied to for grant funds was specific to the replacement of the window and some of the front facade pieces to that actual building. The current windows are cracked in several places, the casings are rotting, staff did a review of the project and did a walkthrough in the building, and certainly not without merit. Building is not considered historic, so it does not require review by the HPC. That was confirmed by our city planner, Justin Fortney. Eligible project costs are just over $19,000, well exceeding the required one-to-one match of at least $5,000 or $10,000 in work to receive the $5,000 in grant money. So with that, staff is looking for motion to approve the resolution as presented. And my understanding is they are quick to get going. If approved tonight, it's likely they would start tomorrow, if not Monday. That's what I have.
Any questions for Eric? Not, we'd look for a motion to approve. This. Commissioner Johnson approved and Commissioner Sinclair second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed, that carries. So, and next we have the resolution 2022-11, approving exclusive sales negotiation for, I think it's Block 1 for mental development until September 10th.
Thank you, Mr. President and HEDRA Commissioners. Following up on the discussion we had at our last meeting, before you is a resolution providing for exclusive sales negotiations for the property, which goes by a couple of different names. We call it Block 1. It's Lot 1 of Riverfront Edition. It is the property just north of Art Space along the riverfront by the CP railroad tracks. And so we would negotiate over the next 6 months up to September 10th. An agreement. And during that time period, we'd work with Mr. Barson in development to come up with a plan on that based upon some of the discussion that we had at the last meeting. We provided the updated Alta survey and property information on that, and we'd be looking for more information on the commercial space and the use of the property itself. So that's what we have before you tonight. It is a resolution that would start that period out and beginning process here of working to see if we can make something happen on that property. So I could stand for any questions.
Any questions for John?
have there been any communications with Mint Development on that timeframe and any communication back and forth with them?
Yeah, I know Rob is in the audience here. We've had some conversation on the timeframe itself. Rob, I'm assuming that that is acceptable, or do you have any comments related to that?
Thanks, John. Evening, Commissioners. Yeah, we're comfortable with the 6 months. We've been working with our design team already based on the Alta. So we've made a little bit of progress, not as much as we were hoping for tonight, but we can definitely work within the constraints of the 6 months and hopefully find a mutually agreeable price for the site.
There's no other.
Can I get a quick clarification? So tonight's agreement, John, is just to allow 6 months for staff and Mint Development to come up with a purchase price. And it's that's all that's happening between now and then.
Correct. And if it happens sooner, great, but it would have an extension period of up to 6 months to do that. We're hoping that something could come back sooner. I think everyone would be in that we could get to a point where a potential development agreement could be drafted. But we really need to have an idea of, on both sides, as to what the project would be, what the valuation would be, and really look at that on the land price.
Okay. That's all. Thank you. I would make a motion to approve that then.
A second from Lori. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, and that motion carries. And next up is the Hastings Business Park discussion. So, Eric?
Thank you, Mr. President, and bear with me, this might be a little bit longer. I've got a whopping 4 slides on this one. So we're really hoping to get a nice, robust conversation from HEDRA this evening with respect to the business park. So broad overview for those that maybe are newer or less familiar with it. So the entire business park itself is about 55-acre site in terms of what we have HEDRA-owned land shovel-ready. We've also got 8 properties between 1 and 3 acres also available for sale. All in the industrial park is roughly 80 parcels total. Permitted uses you see there on the left in terms of what's allowed by right. Special use permits, so uses that are allowed with special conditions on the right-hand side there. Again, permitted being much more that manufacturing angle, special use permit being more, a little bit outside of the typical business park, but something we're open to. Architectural requirements, I do want to stress that not necessarily the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is something that would make recommendations for changes, but wanted to make sure that you are all aware of what the architectural requirements are for the industrial park in terms of whether it's the front facade, side, rear. Of course, the front being the most strenuous in terms of expectations for what that looks like, albeit metal panels are a Class 1 material, and it is required that the front facade be at least 75% Class 1. So that's why you still see buildings that are majority metal buildings. So just something I want to note with respect to architectural requirements in the 3 classes which are shown on the screen there. Cumulative development. So what have we accomplished to date? Total acres sold, a little over 40. Out of that 40 acres, based on that $1.54 a square foot, it's roughly $2.7 million in land valuation that has been sold by HEDRA. About 388,000 square feet of building space, tax valuation of just over 16 million. Now, we started to look through this in terms of, okay, like how are we doing on an average per square foot? From a building standpoint, so that actual square footage of building, just over $53. Actual land, so land that we're selling, which is what we're most familiar with, roughly $10.50 with 79 jobs created. In 2022, it'll be about $111,000 in city taxes, so it's just the city portion, that's not the county or the school district, just the city portion. And I wanted to note for that 1050 average, we need to hit about $457,000 in valuation, building valuation per acre developed. A couple of projects, the most recent ones, haven't quite hit the tax roll, so we don't have their dollars just yet and how they'll factor in. But a handful are slightly smaller projects, so they will come in likely below that 1050 number, with likely the exception of Quality 1. So what we're asking of HEDRA this evening, are there certain uses? So as when staff is getting calls about, hey, I see land for $1, people get excited about what they perceive as very cheap land. What sort of calls do you want us to maybe prioritize, or do you want to be subsidizing? Really, at the end of the day, this is a business subsidy. What type of uses do you want to be subsidizing using public tax dollars to draw into the community that maybe we otherwise couldn't, but for that subsidy? Are there certain architectural expectations? So do you want to see more than 75% front facade metal? Do you want a higher level building from an architectural standpoint if you're going to provide, again, a public subsidy? The whole approach, land for $1. If it's not apartments, it's industrial. That's really hot right now. Do we necessarily need to be subsidizing land to attract industrial? Some of the market would say no. But we need to also be cognizant of our location and the acreage. You might not have to subsidize a 1 million square foot warehouse because you're looking for those all over, but for what we're doing, maybe you do. Is there a minimum valuation that we're trying to achieve post-development? Again, industrial land is not cheap. Eventually, this park will be fully developed and the city will be faced with the decision. Do we look for land to purchase and do another city industrial park, or do we leave it to the private market? If it is a city industrial park, we need to acquire land, we need to extend utilities, we need to build roads. All that costs money. Now, the intent being that as we sell land and we attract business, we make that money back through taxes, land sales, et cetera, but that's not without an enormous upfront expense. So we want to make sure we're being good stewards of the industrial land we do have now. Jobs. Currently, we subsidize on jobs as well if the construction credit doesn't wipe out the deferred assessment. Everybody in this room is aware that you throw a rock, you hit a job right now. It's not for lack of not having jobs in the community. You could question or ask, well, what kind of jobs are available? Are there certain types of jobs we want to attract that maybe we don't currently have? But again, do we need to be subsidizing to attract jobs if we already have a fair amount of vacancies? Is there additional or different activities? Childcare is a big conversation in the economic development world. If somebody were to provide on-site childcare, is that something we'd want to subsidize maybe instead of jobs? Just again, I'm throwing ideas at the wall to see what you guys might think and looking to get some feedback on. And then the last question, is the minimum amount of square footage that you'd want to see developed based on the land sold. Currently, you require 20% of the lot be covered by a building to be eligible for the 10% construction credit. So that's already a policy you have in place for the land for the $1. But even beyond that, again, because we're starting to dwindle on lots available, do you want to have a blanket policy for any land sale? That's something we'd look to have some feedback on. And I'll stop there and open it to you.
Just to sum up some of the things here, I mean, industrial park has been around for a long time. We've had policies within the industrial park that have not had a lot of tweaking in 20 or more years. And so we're asking the question tonight, how do things work? And what things might we want to change in there? With the understanding that the industrial park is well developed right now, and we're getting down to a point in which land is becoming scarce. So it's kind of twofold, the industrial park we have now and how new development might be prioritized in there with the subsidies we grant and what we might do in the future. So really open discussion tonight, and I appreciate all the work that Eric has done here in putting together some of the background information on this. So we'll turn it over to you guys for questions, comments, and direction.
Okay, any questions for John or Eric? Commissioner Vaughn?
Probably more of a comment, but as I drove through, I think we should be consistent and call it an industrial park, not, or a name, what do we call it for the future? But I think we're up against everybody. Everybody wants more businesses to come here and create jobs and buildings and revenue. I think we should look at our current inventory that's out there today and ask them, and maybe incentivize them to say, what business would help you so you don't have to ship in this product to make your product? Make them say, you know what, it'd be all right if the hinge company were made right down the streets, I didn't have to ship them in from Pennsylvania. And make them all thrive together. It might be a home concept or lumber yard, or everything kind of comes together. I think we need to take care of our people that have committed to being out there. And what can what can we help them with to say, you help us fill up this area so it thrives together, that you all feed off of each other. And I think it'll be unique. And I think these little tail-offs will come with that. So that's my 2 cents. I think that's kind of the niche that was trying to be different than everybody else. And you're right, we're gonna be out of land here soon. But I've asked, there's other land that is next to it that city doesn't own, developers own it. When do we make that move or make that conversation to say, we're seeing some growth, if we're at 75%, we better start making that move so we don't lose out and get landlocked, is something of that nature. So, great discussion. I'm glad you're pushing us. I hope we can push you, and I think push the community a little bit to say, how do we keep helping each other? Because I'm all about jobs, and the jobs, you're right, but I want jobs where somebody says, I want to just live here at $4 a gallon. I don't really want to drive anywhere. I just want to go to my job, go home, go to the schools, enjoy the community as is. I think that's our future. So the more we can create a job that says, I want to live there, that's the kind of job I'm looking to bring in. Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Johnson?
Along those same lines, I think it's worth asking the existing tenants of the industrial park, how are you doing on space? I mean, if we're down to just a handful of lots and we sell them out, I don't want anybody to leave because there's no room to expand. So just getting a feel for their future plans and if they're going to get landlocked and have to move out as a result. Is there anything we can accommodate there?
Commissioner Sinclair?
I don't know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. But I guess the question is, is there a reason to start to build a strategy around small versus large business? I'm a small business owner, grown something from 2 guys in a truck to 50 people, and that creates a unique opportunity. It's a certain pace, it's a certain kind of, growth model, and then you've got the sort of built-in fill the 40 with some giant megalopolis of a FedEx distribution or Amazon or, pick your giant business and get in bed with them. I'm sure there's pros and cons to both. I don't know, absent some detailed market analysis, how you'd ever actually extract real data from that. It's more of a feel, but if I think Hastings has a unique kind of footprint and locality relative to the cities. My gut is bet on small business and incubate small business, put those in a position to grow and thrive, as opposed to try to be, the allure to some much larger and probably more imposing and dictating type of business, because those relationships tend to have a certain element of, I don't know, there's an expectation within those, as opposed to hey, thanks for this opportunity. They tend to show up with, well, here's our demands in order to come to your community. So if we go, I'd be inclined to start to try to build some strategy around a small to mid-size incubation strategy and market the city as, hey, Hastings is a place for businesses to come and either start or maybe not. The start that's a little bit dangerous, because that statistically most of them aren't going to make it. But if with some basis of success and some performance, proof of performance, or some revenue, a couple, 2-3 years, whatever we decide, you create some element of kind of targeting them. I think that could be pretty successful, especially in that area. I mean, it's an area that, Mark, I think that would lend itself to what you're talking about, where you find synergies between small businesses. They support one another. They're not entirely isolated. And if you look at, say, what's going up and down 61, it's that kind of small business condo concept that tends to create real estate or space or storefront or whatever they need. It's actually not usually storefront. It's just a place to park a couple trucks and an office to house some staff, and it seems like you've got a density of small businesses versus a single large or a couple large where you're beholden to them. I think that could be effective. I think that could, if we had incentives for those, it might compel somebody to say, hey, let's go base out of Hastings. They're doing things to help support a small business, and I don't know if you call it an incubator, but if you have the mentality of being a community sort of backed incubator, it could be pretty effective. That's a dissertation without a lot of data to back it up. It's more just based on personal experience, but something to think about.
I just want to comment because I think, it kind of bounces back to what Trevor's talking about, though. The incubator may be for that growth business that can't grow where they're at. Maybe they come to this place to take that next step, and it's a little more safer because you've got some legs under you. You've made it 2 or 3 years. I can't grow where I'm at. Maybe Hastings is the place where I grow, and we have enough space that they incubate out. Maybe they're in a network. They all call each other saying, "We had success. I'd go down there and try them out." And I'm all in favor of smaller ones versus the big one. The big one just, I think you're right. I think it's going to come with a bunch of expectations. Put it that way.
Commissioner Brox?
I agree with Commissioner Sinclair. I think I really saw during COVID about the strength of small businesses. It was really clear to me just how small businesses want to stay in the community they're in. They want to reinvest in the community, and they're making lunches for kids. They're doing other things that are valuable to the community. So I think as much as we can, we want them to stay here and stay open. And I think, and that's happening, and I'm really happy to see that. What I was thinking, though, was also that I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. I wonder if we are competing with or losing deals to people who are choosing to locate in Prescott because the property taxes are so much lower on the other side of the river. That's where the land for a dollar program, to me, would be our strength, because the upfront cost of getting the land would be lower, even if the property taxes in the longer run we would capture. I don't know, I'm just spitballing out loud, but are there a lot of times where we're losing people who would move here otherwise because they're locating on the other side of the river? And if so, are there ways for us to remove obstacles to people locating here that have to do with cost? Because to me, the land for a dollar is something that we can do that can help remove some of the cost obstacles. So even though we don't have a lot of land left, we are still competing with other localities that are around us. And I think Wisconsin and their situation is a real factor. Have you guys seen that, or is this just something I made up?
Mr. President, Councilor Brox, when I look at the land that we've got left, roughly that 1 acre piece, so for $1.54 a square foot, we're somewhere in the realm of like $65,000 an acre. Ballpark, on top of my head math. A lot of the projects we're looking at for $500,000, I don't know that the cost of land really moves something one way or another on a project of that scale, just based on what the land. Now, maybe the land's actually worth more than $1.54, but that's what we're operating under at this point. I haven't so much heard that, hey, we're losing a lot to Prescott. Maybe the biggest or most public loss to Wisconsin was likely the distillery, losing to River Falls, but that's state liquor laws. That's nothing we can control. So I haven't heard a lot of that. We have heard in terms of, hey, we're looking around. Customer service often is something they look for. I'd like to think that Hastings is strong in that respect. Now, obviously, I'm talking about myself here, so I'm not going to say otherwise. But I haven't heard that specifically to Prescott. No, it's not to say it's not happening. We just don't have that information at this point.
And I think a big factor that goes into this too is employment. It's always difficult to find employers the further east you go into Wisconsin. The employment field is much smaller. And so that's a detriment. I know when talking to folks in the past, even when the employment market wasn't as tight as it was today, that was a big question mark that came forward. I mean, and frankly, it's a question mark that we hear sometimes in Hastings as well, just because this this proximity myth that we tend to be under, where people believe we're further out than we are. So that factors in, but yeah, I believe that Eric's right on that one. When you're taking a look at some of these costs for land, I don't know how much the land factors into it. I think it's the overall cost over time, and one of those is going to be labor.
I guess I'd just make a couple comments. I've been in Hastings since 2002, and when I first got here at the bank, we did quite a few projects out in the industrial park until about 2006, 2007, and then it stopped. And it was stopped for quite a few years before just recently we're starting to see a lot of activity again. You know, and I just want to be careful how we look at that, because I don't want to stop it again. But one thing that's real encouraging is now we're starting to see these apartment buildings come up, which will provide people, which will provide labor for these businesses, and they'll see growth in the community, which may entice them to come and move to Hastings, because we're starting to see growth again. So I think that's important that we have this growth happening. But I don't want to box us in on what we do in the industrial park. Second concern would be, do we hear anything about trucking and access and getting in and out for transportation? And is that industrial park the right spot for the industrial park, or would, you know, if we're looking in the future, where would we move it? Would we want to buy more land next to it, or would we want to buy land someplace else? So just trying to think that through.
Yeah, Mr. President, ideally, we'd be on an interstate, right? But we're not, and nowhere on the city is. So in terms of where we would look next to, I think it all becomes a value proposition. If there's land directly adjacent to this existing park that can be purchased for a reasonable amount and utilities are right there, that might be a better situation than, hey, we're trying to find brand new land that we need to extend utilities. It could be miles away, we don't know. And what does that look like? What we've heard is that, of course, the 52 corridor down to Rochester is very strong. So I think we'll see more growth on 47, 55 heading that way to hit that main artery going south. You know, no secret, the 316 project is something that the business community is working through at this point. You know, that's been both good and both bad, but I think by and large, overall positive. But I have not heard anybody that's reached out to us saying, hey, I'm interested in land in Hastings, as 316 or access being an issue.
Any other comments?
Sure. Just to tack on to what Commissioner Vaughn and Commissioner Sinclair were saying, that idea of a bridge solution for the small business that's becoming not in a garage business, but not quite a large facility business, that is a cool concept. I think it would be challenging to do without leasable space, kind of what you were alluding to. But if you had that option, and that's a big ticket dollar-wise, right? But if you had leasable space in there for them to grow with some incentive with additional property in an expanded park, that would be really cool to see them grow and make it and expand locally then. So it'd actually be a bridge from small to medium to more self-sufficient, all in the same locale. That'd be a pretty neat model. Capital intensive, though.
That's a good question here, folks. We've talked a lot about small business growth, and a lot of the park that we've had traditionally has been consistent with that. We have a 50-acre piece out that we've kept for a period of time, looking at that as a larger type of business. What that would be, we don't know, but something that would generally take up 20, 30, 40, 50 acres that would provide many more jobs than what we've seen on other industrial developments. We don't need to answer that question tonight, but is that the approach that we should be taking on this? Should we still have that as a reservation? Or is it a both proposition in which we should have that, but we also should be looking at ways in which we can still create those smaller business opportunities?
I don't know if I understood the question exactly, John, but if we've looked at that parcel as, hey, let's keep this fully intact so that we don't preclude some large business from taking over the majority of it, I'd be inclined to say, I'd rather do the opposite and make that parcel conducive to small to medium-sized business and start to carve it up. Partially because I'd ask, what is the market proven in terms of the likelihood of that angel large company coming in? It seems readily apparent that even in the best of market conditions, the phone's not exactly ringing off the hook. Converse, the small to medium-sized business is finding that industrial park a great location. You've got several new companies moving in, or at least proposing to move to Hastings, that are really solid, growth-minded, potential upside businesses. So it seems to me the market's telling us, let's start to think, let's stop the reservation for the large and start to think how to break that up into a small to medium-sized parcels that would invite small to medium-sized businesses to come in. That would be my take on it.
I agree with you, Commissioner Sinclair, later. I still think we put so much time and effort to make that thing shovel-ready for a larger one. But when I say larger, it's gonna create a lot of jobs though. So it's not gonna be a warehouse where it just stores stuff. It's gotta be job creation that's in there. Because if somebody just wants it to say, oh, this would be great for 8 jobs, or something that's just not enough, then I say, no, we're not selling it for that. But we got a few other pieces of property to go after first to try to get this incubator that you're talking about concept. But staff should at least have that option, but, because if those fill up, then it's time to make that harder decision. And maybe we take that 50 and break it in half and just try to keep working our way across it. But I still want to leave it there, in my opinion, as long as it brings a lot of jobs. And I think Commissioner Grobisch was talking about this. Those apartments that we have coming here potentially have a lot of potential employees coming in. The number we heard at council the other night was crazy, how many units are coming in for Hastings. And that's hopefully a job, somebody that owns a facility looking for employees, that's the answer. Because they're rentable product that they can, again, in cycles, that they go from the apartment to buy the house and just keep growth in Hastings. So I'm not ready to give up on it yet, but I understand where you're coming from.
Mr. President, with respect to that in terms of a large warehouse, what we're hearing is these developers are looking for at least 200 acres for these large warehouse distribution facilities. So frankly, we get weaned out, if you will, from those giant warehouse distribution centers just based on acreage available alone. So I think we're not going to be considered for some of those projects, but we could be in that middle sweet spot of, something like an Intech Plastics, or like at that scale of, hey, 1 to 3 acres isn't enough, but boy, I'd love 10, 15, maybe even a bigger. Hey, you got a 40? That'd be awesome.
I think when you get someone that brings that question to you, that's a good time to discuss, well, do we split it in half if we need to, so. But any other questions for Eric?
Yeah,
Good
but
discussion on it.
What I'm hearing tonight, pretty universally from the group, is that the opportunities that we can present here for the growth of small businesses is important, and potentially something that differentiates us from others. I mean, you have other people within. When we talk to our colleagues in the more growth areas of Dakota County, I mean, they're interested in these larger type of developments for these larger businesses. And that's fine, that's their market, but they're not talking about the types of things that we're doing here. And perhaps that's something that can be a differentiation for us as we look into the future.
Is it something where we need to look at the price of the land too? Do we increase that at some point? And
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember, it's been a couple of years since we looked at that. It's always good to review what the land price is and how that compares to the market. And then it comes back to what we want to prioritize. And here, as Councilmember or Commissioner Proxit brought up earlier, is how much does the land come into a factor here for some of these developments? So I think that's something we can look at, yeah.
okay.
And Mr. President, if I could, previous item on your agenda was for TIF financing. So it's something that we're able to provide, again, a public subsidy. We look for something that we can get that maybe we wouldn't get but for that public subsidy. Kind of going back to whether it be that uses or that architecture, if you're going to provide a public subsidy, do you, if it's not square footage of building, or if it is, or if it's visually, do you have any thoughts, preferences, ideas with respect to expectations for architecture or exterior materials specifically for something that might receive a public subsidy?
Commissioner Brox?
So that's what I was raising my hand to talk about, was the architecture piece. I guess, in the absence of more information, I don't want to be creating obstacles unnecessarily, for somebody to say no. So is this a situation where, I'm assuming that as we increase the type of class materials that we require, that is an increased cost when you put up the building? Is that something that, because I know there are nicer looking buildings, I'm thinking of like Storm Creek building is a nicer looking building on that block, but it kind of sticks out because it's the only one in that area. And it is a retail space, which I don't know works incredibly well in that area. So when I think about types of businesses that would work well there, I don't necessarily think of retail. But that one is probably one of the nicer looking buildings. So it's really hard, I think, to think of a policy. I don't want to create a policy that is going to exclude someone or push them towards not coming if they're going to want to locate in the business park. But, is that a factor? What is the data or the other business, what do they say about, is the overall goal to improve the look of the area? I think that's really hard to do when you're in a more industrial manufacturing type environment. And even the CrossFit building, which is a more recent build, is still very industrial, metal building looking. So I don't know if I'm willing to change the policy or the standards, unless I understand kind of what we're hoping to accomplish with that change.
Yeah, President Goldbush, Commissioner Brox, I think really the intent would be, let's just for round numbers, say the land cost is, let's see, $65,000 an acre, they're buying 2 acres, $140,000. And say, hey, this is what their plan would have been without this. We'll say, hey, we're willing to write down the cost of the land, but if we're going to do so, we want to see additional stone, or we want to see wood, or whatever that might be. And yes, it will come at a greater cost. The intention or expectation would be that that reduction in land would offset that increase in material costs.
Would that also increase the value of the property then in the tax base is what you're looking for? Yeah. Commissioner St. Clair?
Even after 7 years of architecture school, and I couple that with now the experience of growing a small business, I find little correlation between how pretty a building is and how successful the business is. And I'd be less inclined to make it more imposing or a bigger financial burden based on aesthetics, particularly based on the fact that driving through that industrial park, you don't go there for architectural inspiration, but I do think that there's some wildly successful businesses running in there, creating great jobs, doing great work, and some inside of entirely ugly buildings, which, given that reality, I'd be inclined to say, build a sturdy building where you can start, run, grow your business, and you'll fit right in that park. I just don't know that there's enough. You start adding architectural amenities, and I think they'll start to stand out, and not necessarily in any kind of good or a productive way. So I wouldn't be a big proponent of increasing the architectural elements in any way. That would be my take on the architectural side, Eric. Unrelated note, and I don't know how this fits into the conversation, but in terms of being shovel-ready or appealing to people, I have had the thought that if we could partner around fiber or just the general state of interconnectivity and fast-moving data, that has occurred to me that might be a pretty effective pitch, especially for small businesses. That could be, the cost of that seems to be going down. There's more competition in the area now. And for us to have, developed a strategy with one of those carriers, which I love the fact that there is some competition now, that might make that a little more cost-effective. That could be a really big pitch for new businesses going in over there, if that was a piece of the shovel-ready, or that we had negotiated something specifically for the industrial park with one or both of the carriers. I think there's two now at least, right? There's Comcast and HSB or something that's moved in. So we added fiber before that new competitor came to town, and it is expensive, but if you're any kind of data-driven business, it's a pretty cost-effective investment too, I think. So something to think about.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I agree about the curb appeal statement as far as industrial operations. If there were to be any consideration for requirements, if we're worried about long-term viability of the facility, maybe just minimum head height requirements or construction style, precast buildings, you can expand easier and not lose head height than, steel construction, things like that for long-term flexibility.
Anything else for Eric? It seems to me, if I remember right, too, going back, and we did increase the standards in the industrial park at one point, and I think it did slow down development, but it could have been the crash too that we had at the point, but it was a combination of the two, I think. So
Yeah, we put together some standards right around 2003-04, and that's what we've gone forward with as of today on that one. There really hasn't been much change in it. That in the application of those, I take a look at areas that have more visibility, the areas that are around Spiral or Enterprise, 31st that have more traffic, and want to try to do more on those facades. On some of the areas with less visibility, less so. I mean, taking that general practice. So like, for example, we've been working with WSI on the corner of Enterprise and Spiral, and we're looking, hey, we want to have something on that corner that, that it has a little more to it than what we would generally see elsewhere. But it's difficult in an established park when you have buildings of varying degrees to bring people forward. It's very incremental over time, and sometimes it can be difficult.
yeah, and we don't want to lose them.
No, and that's the thing. We want to look at what our objectives are on this and make sure that those go through.
Good. Anything else on this topic, or are we ready for the next?
Yeah, thank you guys for the discussion, and yeah, there's good stuff for us to think about here, and there'll be more to come.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to the reports and information.
Thank you, Mr. President. Staff met with the ownership group for Westview Mall earlier last month now. Get an update on kind of what's going on, what we can expect, where can we be helpful, and what are they, how are they trying to be successful? We got an update on both the restaurants that the ownership group of the mall itself is opening themselves. Rooster's Chicken and Caprese. It's an Italian pizza. Rooster's Chicken, they actually just renewed their building permit on. They hope to have that open early this summer. Caprese open by the end of the year. So that they got delayed by like many because of specifically restaurant equipment, that they couldn't get the equipment that they needed to open the restaurants. But that is progressing forward. They've got a very strong desire to land a national in the former Sterling Drug end cap. They were specifically interested in Aldi. Staff reached out to their real estate team. We had a couple conversations, exchanged emails, provided them information, what the cost per square foot was, what the CAM costs were, additional information of the area. At the end of the day, well, they initially showed some interest. It wasn't quite there for them to pull the trigger and vet that further. But they appreciated the effort, and then we'll continue working with them, trying to help them land, again, a national tenant to help anchor that, at the Westview Mall. They are interested at some point expansion in the outlot where the current farmer's market is located. At this point, they'd like to see additional commercial on that corner. I did pitch that, hey, multifamily is very hot right now. If you wanted to make that available, it could be interesting. And the grades are such that I think you could get a tuck-under garage there pretty easily. They didn't say no to that either, but at this point, they were most interested in commercial. However, their financial backing provided them feedback that, hey, drop your vacancy in the space you have now, and then we'll talk about adding additional commercial space. They did indicate that one of the struggles that they have with this space is just the overall depth of the units. I learned that at one point, basically there was a hallway down the middle of the shopping center, and so there wasn't nearly as deep of, units, and so that was causing them some headache, but at the end of the day, the building is what the building is. They're not in a position to cut off half of it, right? So that's kind of where they're at right now. We're going to continue to partner with them, meet with them regularly, see how things are going. They're very supportive of what's going on. They were happy to hear about the additional development going on across the city. They think that will help. And that's kind of where they're at right now. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Commissioner Vaughn?
Thank you. Eric, I want to give you hats off. I hear from others how they want you guys as staff to be reaching out to businesses, and you should tell them, you just shared a great story that you assisted a private developer that owns the property, and you connected them. You made that phone call to that developer to make that connection, then kind of let them handle it from there. That is really great to hear, and that's really important to share to the community that you guys are doing it, but you're working with the private sector. And I think that's very important to share that to the community. So everybody knows we're here to help people. We're not just going to be calling up Aldi saying, you should really come to Hastings. Well, we don't have we're going to put them in the industrial park. I don't know where we're going to put them. This is a great example of you helping current people that live here and want to grow. I think that's a great story. So I would continue that. That's a great thing. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or? Thank you, Eric. So your next one is the business retention visit to Hastings Arts Center.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Councilmember Fox, and Mayor Fassbender visited the Hastings Arts Center about a week and a half ago. Some background on Hastings Arts Center. This body actually supported that organization with 2 different revolving loans, primarily in support of the renovation of the building itself. The roof was in disrepair, a lot of building issues, basically building-wide, that needed to be attended to really before it could be made back into a usable space. So very appreciative of that. They're current on their loans. They're one that actually refinanced their loan to a fixed rate with us in December of last year. So all that's going very well. They were complimentary and thanked the HEDRA board for that assistance and that investment in their business. What do? So they offer music lessons for a variety of instruments. They actually currently have a wait list for piano. That's becoming a very, very popular instrument. They actually grew during the pandemic. They saw more students and more adults, and especially seniors, interested in learning a musical instrument. So they see a high demand for that. They've got 7 or 8, if memory serves, different spaces where they can have lessons, soundproof rooms. Just the doors in this, it was like $5,000 a door. It's just really impressive soundproof doors. They also have a gallery space. They offer concerts throughout the day. They also mentioned that they have interest in doing something like a bluegrass festival at some point. They would be very interested in doing that. How that all comes together, a lot of moving pieces, but they've got big ideas and big dreams for that. As I mentioned, they've got the gallery space, so artwork for sale within their building that does rotate from time to time. Currently, the artist is from the Duluth area, some really great pieces. And in their kind of main kind of gathering area, they also offer weekly yoga. So it's not like a set fee, it's just pay what you can afford or what you think is right for the service that you're receiving, and as a way to get people into the center and see what they have to offer in the space that they have. They added 2 new teachers in the past 2 years. Again, as I mentioned, they're seeing a demand for their services. And then as always, we ask them, hey, why do you want to be here? What do you see as strengths and weaknesses? Their strengths, they like the proximity to the metro, as often many do, our parks, trails, the river amenity, and our good schools. In terms of weaknesses, they said, they're seeing growth, which is really great, that they're fearful that some will start to push back on that growth, and also welcoming and encouraging diversity. So they're hopeful that we'll continue to make strides in that area. This is our second BRNE visit that staff has completed this year. Got another scheduled for next week, and again, we strive to do at least 12 of these each year. We also attend ambassador visits with the chamber. Mr. President?
Commissioner Vaughn?
Thanks, I just wanted to do a quick follow-up, because I wanted to go to this, but I missed it, but it's a great example where I've always thought our downtown needs to grow farther up. It's always Second Street that we talk about, and this is a great example where I see growth coming up to Fourth Street. I still think we as a city, probably as a council, I look at our parking lot that we share here with City Hall, it needs to be lit. Our standards are higher if we put it in somewhere else. And I think it would help this property thrive too, because I think some of these users, when you mention a bluegrass event, they're gonna use the parking lot. That's a great use of public parking lot. Then we need to make it safe, we need to make it private, and I think it's gonna help other business growth come up this way, and I think there's some businesses across the street here that are gonna thrive from that. So I think we can do a little better job on the city side, but having them do these events just keeps bringing more people to then more than just Second Street. So thanks for sharing that story, and it's great to hear that they thrived, that they grew during the COVID times. Thank you.
Okay. Next update is, if you want to continue with development updates on.
Development updates. There's a few things going on around town, which is great. Monday night, we created 300 housing units, or approved 300 housing units, between 211 apartment units down at County Crossroads, which is 33rd Street between Terry's Hardware and Colburn. So understanding that project, be 2 buildings, 100 units apiece. They would be starting construction come summer on that project. So it'd be great to enliven that area downtown, hopefully, or that area in the south part of town. There's other opportunities for future development there with parcels that could be developed, and a mall that is for sale and has a lot of vacancy within it. So hopefully that'll be a good anchor for that area of town. Within the downtown area, a 90-unit building for Stencil, as we discussed earlier tonight. So when you take a look at the Stencil project and the Seaward project, that's 130, 140 units. That almost doubles what we have downtown right now for the number of apartment units. So that's gonna have a dramatic change on what happens, which is great. We're at probably right now about 850 housing units between 2020 and today that have either been approved, under construction, or close to it at this point. So it's great stuff to hear. From a commercial side, you may have noticed Enterprise is gone. Jersey Mike's is under construction on Vermillion Street, which is great to see. The Confluence is making progress as well. I was over there today. They have painted the entire facility on the inside. They've replaced most of the windows. And it is amazing when you take a look at what that does to liven up the place, especially that second floor, that vaulted area where the banquet facility is. That looks really well put together right now. They've also been carving out some areas between the first floor and the second floor where they have kind of large foyer areas or balconies between both. So it really opens up the site. They're making good progress there, and hope that continues to move forward. We had a approval of an auto body shop, use within an existing building, a green lawn sprinklers in the industrial park that was approved. We're working on another building expansion, small one for International Fluid Dynamics on Millard Avenue to put another 3,000 square foot building behind there. Met with them yesterday, which is great. Approved Bird scooters. They should be deploying by the end of the month. I did remind that these folks who are from Santa Monica that this is Minnesota and that might not work, but hopefully weather-wise will be good. So we're working with our communications staff, and they're going to be speaking with the chamber, and there'll be more information on the deployment of this, which will be great. Heritage or Quality One Woodwork, I was told by our building official that they are about to issue or just have issued temporary CO. So they're finishing up their large expansion project, 50,000 square feet there. So that's great to see that that's moving forward. And on the annexation project in the south end of town, haven't heard too much more on that one. They're still out there meeting with folks for potential purchase, but nothing new to report on that one. So I can stand for any questions on anything there.
Any questions for John? A lot of really good activity, so it's really exciting to see. So thank you for all your hard work on it. And I think that's it for our meeting.
That's all we had tonight as staff.
Okay. Well, with that, I thank you for joining tonight. We'll be looking for a motion to adjourn. Second, and all in favor, signal by saying aye. Aye. Thank you.